All right, so this is the first presentation in Unit 2, and Unit 2 is the classical time period, so basically from about 1000 BC to 500 AD. Most of the focus will be on Greece and Rome. Then we'll also talk about a little bit about India and then the Han Dynasty in China. All right, so we're going to start with early Greece. So real quick, geography of Greece, because this is big in shaping, of course, their culture and how they developed. It's very mountainous. Got over 1,000 islands in the region, and then the land is also poor in natural resources. And so because of this, people are mainly going to live along the coasts, so that way they can fish and stuff like that. And of course, access to trade, so they can trade over here with Asia Minor, present-day Turkey, and then of course down over to the Middle East in that direction, and then Egypt down to the south. And then, of course, the mountains divide everyone up, and so this is why you're going to see city-states. So Greece at this time was never like a unified empire. It was never, all together. All the cities were separate and had their own governments, their own militaries, and stuff like that. So like Athens and Sparta, and so on and so forth, Olympia. All these cities were individual, had their own culture and everything like that. And they generally all spoke Greek, but obviously they could have different dialects and things of that sort. And then the climate in this region is pretty warm throughout the year, and so this allowed for a lot of outdoor activities, hence the Olympics are going to begin here 3,000 years ago, and so they were outside quite a bit. All right, the Mycenaean civilization is the first one in this region, the first kind of big one. Nobles are at the top of this social chain here, and then your farmers and pretty much everybody else was at the bottom. And then they took on the Minoans, who were before them, their writing system, which becomes part of the Greek language as well. So there's a lot of basic things from the Mycenaean civilization and culture that really kind of became the foundation of Greek civilization. Borrowed a lot of things from them. And this is a death mask that they would put on the rulers and stuff when they died. And this is most likely the face of King Agamemnon, and that's his grave there. I visited there. This is to the west of Athens on Peloponnesus, so just past Corinth. But this is his grave, and you can see how huge this is. And this was built around close to 3,000 years ago. And all Macedonian architecture has a triangle above the doors, and it has to do with the religious beliefs and stuff like that, kind of the spiritual idea for them. You see inside the tomb, that's where his body was in there. You see another triangle again in there. And then this is the citadel he ruled from. So this was basically a big castle on top of this mountaintop. And so if you were an invading army to attack, you had to go up this path where you had archers on this wall and this wall over here shooting at you as you came in. And then it gets narrower, so it would cram you all together to where you really couldn't get in. And strategically, it's in a great spot. It's up on top of a mountain. You can see the whole valley out here. Where you have olive trees and stuff like that, and those groves going on. And then kind of out and to the left, you got the Mediterranean Sea is right over there. And so if a naval fleet was coming in, he would have a couple of days to defend the castle and get ready for battle as the army would march across the valley and come up to the citadel. So you can just see, basically the strategy there, and placement of that citadel, which is pretty cool. All right, then the Trojan War, so kind of getting into Greek mythology. So the Trojan War was Macedonians versus Troy, and originally historians just thought this was just a made-up story in the Iliad. But we've actually discovered the city of Troy and realized there was actually a big fire there and signs of a large battle, and so there was an actual battle. And so a lot of times what we've discovered over time is that a lot of the Greek mythology and the stories that are told have their basis in reality. And then, of course, they add a lot of the stuff around those stories. If you think about in a modern way, think about the movie 300, which is about the Spartans defeating the Persians or fighting the Persians. And in that movie, of course, there's a lot of mythology added into it, but it's a real event. And so we see the same thing here. So like Achilles, for example, Achilles is this amazing warrior who's like a demigod. He can't be killed unless you hit him in the Achilles. Well, most likely there was probably an incredible warrior that was really famous for that time period, and then you add in the mythology around it to make the story even better. So that really did happen as far as the war goes. All right, then decline of Greek culture. So then after the Macedonians, you have the Dorians take over. And the Dorians were generally just stupid, so they didn't know how to read or write. You see a decline in culture and learning and things like that. But you do see at this time the epics of Homer. So Homer was a blind storyteller, and back then storytellers were pretty popular. There'd be hundreds of them, going around the countryside from town to town. And when they come to your town, you would go out there and you'd pay them money and you would sit down and listen to a story. And so, it was their version of the movies back then. And so these storytellers, they can memorize, 1 or 2 million lines or more of stories and poetry in the telling. And so, of course, it was real dramatic when they told these stories. And so Homer, he told the stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey. So the Iliad basically centers around the story of the Trojan War. And then the Odyssey is about Odysseus and basically him trying to outwit the gods and get back home to his wife and children. He also is in the Iliad as well. Those were so eventually they're written down. So Homer told them, but he didn't actually write them, of course, and he was blind. But later on, they were written down. All right, and then of course their gods that they worshipped. You had Zeus, who was considered like the head god. Hera was his wife. Athena was his daughter that was born out of his head. She's the goddess of wisdom. So each city-state in Greece had a certain god or goddess that was considered like the main deity of that city. So Athens, the main goddess was Athena, who's the goddess of wisdom, and that's why you're going to see a lot of poetry there, philosophy, Aristotle, Socrates, Plato. All those people are going to be coming out of Athens because that's what they value. And then, for example, Sparta is a warlike society, and their god is Ares, the god of war. So keep in mind, for the ancient Greeks, these weren't myths. This was reality. They worshipped these gods, believed they were real, stuff like that. And there's even a small remnant of Greeks today in Greece that still worship these gods and goddesses. So, for them, this was, real. All right, now section 2, getting to warring city-states. So this is mainly focusing on Athens and Sparta, kind of comparing the two. All right, so first off, in your different city-states, you had different types of governments. So the main ones we saw in Greece at this time, early on, were monarchies, aristocracies, and oligarchies. So monarchy, of course, is where you got a king ruling and then rules passed through the family through hereditary rights, basically. Aristocracy is where you got the richest landowning families rule together. So let's say you took the 5 richest families of Fairmount and then they rule the city. Now, obviously, that's going to help the rich people, but for everyone else, the peasants, the poor, and all that, it's not going to be good for them. And then the oligarchy, it's similar to an aristocracy. An oligarchy is where you have a few powerful people ruling. So it's still the same idea of a few powerful people ruling. You can almost think of like a collective dictatorship. But the difference is, it's an aristocracy. It's based on wealth. And whereas an oligarchy, it's just based on power, which isn't necessarily based in wealth. And I give examples in class like Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr., people like that in history, or Jesus, that were incredibly influential and powerful, but didn't have wealth. So generally, and this is going to be like in Sparta, these are going to be military leaders and stuff like that that are greatly respected in their society. All right, and then you see the end of the Dorian Age, obviously, during this time. And so during the Dorian Age, only rich people could afford weapons because they were made of bronze, and bronze was expensive. And, I mean, you can even apply this to today, like why we have the right to bear arms. Here during the Dorian Age, the rich could easily control everyone because they're the ones with weapons. No one else has weapons. But then you get to the Iron Age. Now anybody can have a weapon. Now it's going to be a lot harder for the rich people to maintain control because, keep in mind, there's a lot more poor people than there are rich. And so it's going to be a lot harder to keep them in check. And then Greece is able to start defending itself better because of this new fighting formation called the phalanx. And, I mean, you can kind of see it in this setup here. But basically, they have a big shield holding in their left hand and then their sword or spear in the right. And then they stand in a line, and then you would hold your shield to where the right side of your shield covered the left side of your body. And then the right side of your body was covered by the left side of the shield of the man next to you. So it's a solid wall of shields, and they would march in unison together. But that phalanx is what allowed Greece to defend itself against a much larger empire, the Persians. And then it's what allowed Rome to basically conquer the Mediterranean world. All right, and then you get to Sparta. So first you have tyrants that take over Sparta, and eventually they're taken out, and then you have an oligarchy. So they did have kind of like a senate and stuff like that. We'll get to that here in a minute, but it still basically was powerful people like Leonidas that ruled Sparta. So it's in the southern part of Greece. It was cut off from the rest of Greece, geographically speaking, very mountainous in that region. It was a hard land to live in, so it created basically tough people. And they needed slaves, so they dominated the Messenians, who outnumbered them 9-1 or 10-1 in that region. And so because of that, the Spartans treated them horribly. And so sometimes, randomly, you could just kill one if you wanted to. And they would have certain days, too, where they would just kill a lot of slaves. And this kept them, obviously, in fear and stuff like that. So the Spartans were all about warfare. So in their culture and government, you had two branches, like I said, assembly and the council of elders. And then you had your powerful military men that really kind of led it. It was a very diverse population, and so you have people from all different areas living in Sparta, which is going to bring a lot of different ideas and ways of fighting and stuff like that there. As far as how they lived, really think of it kind of like Nazi Germany. They're trying to create a perfect race for the most part, these perfect people. And so if a child was born with any kind of defect or anything like that, they would throw the baby off a cliff and kill it. And then boys, once they reached age 7, they went to military barracks. They didn't live with their parents. And they were taught to basically do anything to survive. So, if you need more food, you beat up the person next to you and you take his food. If you have to kill another kid, you kill another kid. And so, it was intense, basically. So by the time you turn 18, those that survived and made it through that, these are going to be insanely tough warriors. They're probably a little bit crazy, too, and have some PTSD. And then girls, they played sports, ran, and wrestled, so they were encouraged to be active as well and to be strong. So basically, anyone in Sparta is going to be a strong person that is tough. And then the idea, and this is key here, service to Sparta is more important than service to family. And this, again, is a lot like Nazi Germany, to where, the state and the whole ideal, that is more important than the family. And basically, in the end, you're serving your family by serving Sparta. You're, in the end, helping everyone. So that's Sparta. So very warlike, very intense, and, pushing towards this ideal and, of course, taking out anybody that's not equal. Athens is developing a little bit differently. So Athens, they turned towards a new idea called democracy. And this is the first time we see democracy take place. And so, keep in mind, especially Athens, it's like our first ancestor, basically. So this is where Western civilization comes from. It's born in Athens. So everything we are today comes from Athens. All right, so they create the first democracy. So obviously, democracy is a Greek term, means basically ruled by the people. But at this time, only free adult males took part in the government and could vote, which is very similar to how the U.S. started. Where only white landowning men could vote and take part in the government. And then 621 BC, Draco, he introduces the first Greek legal code. But really the fear is that this wasn't really opening up to enough people. Like, the peasants could still revolt and stuff like that, so we need to expand democracy even more. So then you get Cleisthenes. He comes in, he creates the Council of 500, and this brings in the rich and poor. So it's not just the rich controlling society now. Rich and poor, they all have a voice. This is the first time you see this. So this is like basically where we get the idea of like the House of Representatives or Senate. Where everyone can take part in it. So everyone can help propose laws and counsel the assembly and stuff like that. So everyone is involved. And when you have freedom in a society, it really opens up for that society to flourish. And so creativity, for example, in Athens skyrockets. They're by far the most creative city-state in Greece. And whereas compared to like Sparta, where you're not going to see any creativity really, it's just, you are trained in one area and that's it. And there's only one thing they really prize, and that's a strong warrior. So in Athens, you're going to have all different types of people with all different types of skill sets and things like that. So it's a much more advanced civilization when it comes to what it is they're creating and doing. All right, and then you get to the Persian Wars. So as these city-states in Greece are expanding and growing in power, Persia comes in and tries to take it. So you get a couple of key battles. First one's Battle of Marathon, which was in Marathon, Greece. And the Greeks were outnumbered 8-1, so the Greeks, thought they would probably lose. But using the phalanx, they were able to hold off the Persians. They killed 6,400 Persians, only lost 192 Greeks. Athens was also being attacked at that same time. And in Marathon, after they won that battle, they were afraid the Athenians would just give up, and just assume that they had lost to the Persians. And so they sent a runner from Marathon to Athens to tell the Athenians to defend the city, like they had defeated the Persians at Marathon. So he runs 26.2 miles, like full sprint, gets to Athens, announces that they had won to defend the city, and then he falls over dead. And so that's where we get the marathon from. But the Athenians, they rose up. They actually got in their boats because they're much better at fighting in the sea because it's port, a major port. So they were able to sink a good portion of the Persian fleet. And this, of course, made the Persians insanely mad. So Darius dies. Next king takes over, Xerxes. And then he attacks at Thermopylae, which is north of Athens, a good little ways. And he attacks there with, it was like 50 or 60,000 Persians. And this is where you get to the Battle of 300. So you have 300 Spartans along with 7,000 other Greeks fighting together. And this is the first time where we see Greeks from different city-states uniting together to fight a common enemy. So before, these city-states are staying independent from one another. So they come together and they fight together. Eventually, though, after a few days, the 7,000 Greeks and 300 Spartans killed 20,000 Persians, holding this very tight pass into the mountains. And again, using the phalanx. But eventually, the 7,000 Greeks, they gave up, thought there was no hope, so they fled. And so the 300 Spartans, they stayed and they continued to fight. And eventually, though, they were routed and all killed. But this is really the rallying cry for the Greeks. So, here we got remember the Alamo, continue fighting, think about that sacrifice. So here the Spartans, they weren't just fighting for Sparta, they were fighting for Greece. And this helped unite all the Greeks together, seeing hey, these men sacrificed themselves for all of us, not just Sparta. And so this was the rallying cry for really all the Greeks to come together and unite. So for the first time, all the Greek city-states unite together. Then they fought at Salamis against the Persians. And I think it's like around 7,000 to 10,000 Spartans were involved in that battle. So you imagine what 300 Spartans did at Thermopylae. Just think what 10,000 are going to do. So, they destroy the Persians at this point. And so Persians never get Greece whatsoever. So the big consequences here, the Athenians, of course, become way more confident. And then Greece as a whole, and especially Athens, enters their golden age of civilization. A golden age in a culture or civilization is kind of like the high points, their climax is when all of a sudden you start seeing tons of stuff coming out of the civilization from every area, from every area, the arts, philosophy, government, things like that. Just a huge boom in civilization comes from this. And, of course, a lot of wealth and power and things of that sort.